On an early October morning in 1864, the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, met with abolitionist, activist, and African-American woman, Sojourner Truth. Truth would later write of the meeting, "It was about 8 o'clock a.m. when I called on the President. Upon entering his reception room, we found about a dozen persons in waiting, among them 2 colored women. The President was seated at his desk. Mrs. C. said to him, 'This is Sojourner Truth, who has come all the way from Michigan to see you.' He then arose, gave me his hand, made a bow, and said, 'I am pleased to see you.'" Although the exact tone and content of the meeting between Lincoln and Truth remains a point of debate among historians, Truth's visit to the White House symbolized the culmination of a lifetime devoted to abolitionism and activism. Truth was born in 1797 as Isabella Baumfree, a Dutch-speaking slave in rural New York. Isabella was sold several times before she finally became a free woman in 1826. In 1843, after what she referred to as being, quote, "called in spirit," Isabella Baumfree changed her name to Sojourner Truth and spent the rest of her life traveling the country as a lecturer and activist. With the start of the Civil War, Truth advocated for the inclusion of African American men in the Union Army, and once they were permitted to join, she worked to provide black regiments with food and clothing. Although Sojourner Truth's activism is well known, her story is but one of many that documents the variety of ways African American women contributed to the noble cause of freedom in the United States. Susie King Taylor was born into slavery on August 8, 1848, on the coast of Georgia. When Taylor was 14, she escaped with her uncle's family to the Union-controlled St. Catherine Island and eventually migrated to St. Simons Island. There she opened a school for African American children, and in 1862, Taylor married Sergeant Edward King of the 33rd U.S. Colored Infantry. Taylor traveled with her husband during the war, acting as the regiment's laundress, cook, teacher, and nurse. Much of what is known about Taylor comes from her own memoir, Reminiscence of My Life in Camp, with the 33rd United States Colored Troops, late 1st South Carolina Volunteers. In her book, Taylor describes numerous battles while also sharing personal anecdotes of camp life. Above all, Taylor's memoir conveys with deep personal meaning both the horror of war and the beauty of human compassion. She writes, "It seems strange how our aversion to seeing suffering is overcome in war, how we are able to see the most sickening sights, such as men with their limbs blown off and mangled by the deadly shells, without a shudder, and instead of turning away, how we hurry to assist in alleviating their pain, with feelings of only sympathy and pity." While Susie King Taylor worked as a nurse for the Union Army, other African American women aided the cause of freedom in more surprising ways. As part of the war effort, Union forces often relied on so-called black dispatches, a term used among military officials for intelligence gathered by African Americans in the South. While several people became spies for the Union, one woman, Mary Bowser, worked to gather information at the heart of the Confederacy, in the home of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Unlike Susie King Taylor and Sojourner Truth, Mary Bowser's life is not well documented, and many historians debate her actual identity. Scholars generally agree that Bowser began her life as the slave of John Van Lew in Richmond, Virginia. Upon his death in 1843, the Van Lew family freed all of their slaves, including Bowser. Following her manumission, Mary Bowser continued to work as a domestic laborer for Elizabeth Van Lew, who had strong ties to the Union and established a spy system throughout the Confederate capital. According to some historians, because of Bowser's intelligence and photographic memory, Van Lew recruited her to spy on Jefferson Davis. At the Confederate White House, Bowser worked as a servant, cleaning and serving meals. However, she was also able to obtain information and report back to Van Lew through her Confederate spy network. After the war, some historians believe that Bowser, now going by the name Mary Richards, worked as a teacher in a freedmen's school in Georgia. While Mary Bowser disguised her identity to work as a Union spy, Cathay Williams donned a very different disguise. Born into slavery near Independence, Missouri around 1842, Williams was eventually impressed into service by the federal government to do laundry and cooking for Union soldiers. Cathay spent the remainder of the war attached to the Union Army, traveling throughout Arkansas, Louisiana, Georgia, and Washington, D.C. After the war, Cathay Williams, at the age of about 23, decided to enlist in the Army as a full-time soldier. Disguised as a man, Williams enlisted in 1866 for a 3-year tour of duty with the United States Regular Army in St. Louis, Missouri. When later asked why she disguised herself to join the Army, Williams stated that she wanted to make her own living without being dependent on friends or relatives. Williams' enlistment lasted just under 2 years, however, as an Army surgeon discovered her true gender after she became ill while stationed in New Mexico. Following her discharge, Williams returned to wearing women's clothing and went to work as a cook for an Army officer in Fort Union, New Mexico. In June 1891, she applied for a disability pension based on her military service, and it was then made public that an African-American woman had served in the regular Army as a Buffalo soldier. The stories of Cathay Williams, Mary Bowser, Susie King Taylor, and Sojourner Truth demonstrate that African-American women contributed to and aided Civil War efforts in a variety of crucial ways. Often lost, ignored, or simply overlooked in the history of the Civil War, these women's stories serve as an important reminder of Black women's active roles and experiences during wartime. In the closing pages of her memoir, Susie King Taylor perhaps best summarizes the feelings and thoughts many African American women may have had as they pondered what was at stake in this long and bloody conflict. She writes, "My people are striving to attain the full standard of all other races born free in the sight of God, and in a number of instances have succeeded. Justice, we ask, to be citizens of these United States, where so many of our people have shed their blood with their white comrades, that the stars and stripes should never be polluted."